5. Silas stepped into the motel room, boots silent against the stained carpet. The door hung slightly ajar and lock bent from being forced open. He stepped over the threshold and wrinkled his nose. The smell of mildew and old cigarettes permeated the dingy space, thick enough to settle on his tongue. His eyes darted around the room. Stillness. A towel thrown across the bed, the bedraggled comforter slightly askew. No blood, no signs of a struggle. It looked like they simply left. Quickly, quietly. His gaze swept the rest of the space. The bathroom door stood open, steam still clinging in the mirror in a slow fade. As he moved closer, another layer of scent drifted to him. Damp fabric, cheap toothpaste, and something harder to define. Fear? Urgency? And beneath that, intimacy. It clung to the air like perfume. He let his echo mind rise. Not mind reading, not exactly. His attunement was stranger than that, older. He couldn't lift the thoughts or memories from someone else's head while they were present, but after, he could feel the echoes, the residue, the impressions people left behind, emotional fingerprints smeared across space and time. Silas crossed the room silently, brushing his fingers across the headboard, the cheap wooden nightstand, the bathroom door handle. Each surface whispered something back, bursts of adrenaline, the sharp spike of hesitation, the held breath before a kiss. They were here. They had touched. They had fled. He tilted his head, letting the swirl of emotions tighten like a noose around his senses. Max's present was familiar now, muted from the Subrexin, but distinct, tattered, stretched thin, unstable. Beneath that was something stronger. Mikey. Steady, volatile, protective. The kind of heat that left more behind. Silas stepped towards the window and peered through the blinds. The parking lot below buzzed under the jaundiced haze of a sodium floodlight. In the reflection, he watched himself shift, shoulders rolling back, posture straightening, the pieces locking into place like a loaded chamber. They weren't running blind. Something had spooked them, sure, but this wasn't panic. This was direction. His eyes moved to the table near the motel phone. Nothing obvious, no scribbled note, no dumb trail to follow. He checked the trash. Fast food wrappers, a paper coffee cup, 2 straws, a torn gas station receipt. He smoothed the slip of the paper between gloved fingers. 9:30, Union Station, track 12. 2 tickets. Meet at East Platform. He frowned. Chicago. They were heading for the train, which only meant one thing, the resistance. Silas scoffed aloud. The word tasted bitter and absurd in equal measure. A bunch of ragtag ENPs playing at Revolution, escapees and idealists convinced they could dismantle Durant's empire with nothing but conviction, hand-me-down tech, and a messiah complex. What a goddamn joke. He'd met them before, people in threadbare coats, guarded stares, always looking over their shoulders, always whispering about liberation like it was a religion. Convinced their next rally, next leak, next move would finally shift the tide. They even tried to recruit him once. Offered him the usual, purpose, belonging, a righteous cause. "We need someone like you," the woman had said, eyes too wide, too desperate. "You're not like Durant's people. You know what he is." And maybe that was true, but Silas had laughed in her face. What they never seemed to understand was that he wasn't interested in burning the system down. He was just trying to survive it. Keep his head above water, get paid, move on. And last time he checked, good intentions didn't buy gas or pay for motel rooms. Moral duty didn't refill his tank or put food in his gut. Brotherhood didn't cover bullets or repairs. Waste of time, he thought. Durant was nearly untouchable, propped up by black-budget funding, layers of covert tech, and vast psychic surveillance networks built tighter than anything the Resistance could imagine. And now? Now, rumor had it Durant wasn't acting alone, that he'd partnered with someone worse, someone powerful enough to make even Durant hesitate. A name Silas didn't speak. Because if that was true, if that alliance was real, then this wasn't just a problem. It was a goddamn extinction event for people like Max. Silas didn't give a damn about politics or manifesto or rebel poetry on street corners. He didn't care about changing the world. He cared about results, about keeping his record clean, about getting paid for delivering the mark. And if Max got to Chicago, if he slipped under the resistance wings, got protected, trained, twisted, then everything changed. His job became 10 times harder and messier. Silas wasn't getting paid for messy. No, he had to intercept Max before the train ever left Union Station, before the boy started believing in the fairy tale that the resistance could save him. Because if he did, then Silas might actually have to try. And Silas hated trying. He exhaled slowly and let the last of the room's emotional residue settle into him. Max's panic, Mikey's control, a beat of recognition, a pulse of relief, a plan. They weren't escaping. They were moving with purpose. Silas's lip curled. He could feel their signature pulling him like a compass. He turned towards the door, casting one last glance at the room, still warm with their presence, still humming with tension and closeness and love. They think they're safe now, he murmured. But they weren't. The resistance talked about hope and protection, but they were just another machine, another cog just like Durant. They didn't save EMPs, they used them, recruited them, trained them, and broke them. Max wouldn't last a week with him, not with that kind of power and no understanding of how to wield it. Silas adjusted his coat, his voice low and sharp as broken glass. They'll eat you alive, Devereux. And then, without another word, he stepped out into the night. He had 3 days. He'd find them before they even realized they were being hunted. And when he did, well, 6. Mikey's hands were heavy on the steering wheel. His eyes half-lidded as the delineator post zipped past like fireflies. They were a few hours outside of Chicago. The rural nocturnal landscape stretched endlessly as they drove northwest. His rust-bitten Civic wheezed down the highway, the engine occasionally rattling like a lifelong smoker's cough. He glanced over at Max, fast asleep in the passenger seat. Scratching his nose, he grimaced at the lingering stink of old fries baked into the upholstery, while the air vents spit out heat whether you asked for it or not. His eyes flicked between the cracked windshield, a chipped spiderwebbing across the bottom half of the glass, and the passenger side mirror still duct-taped on from God knows when. Mikey's chest ached, not because of that awful gas station hot dog he had scarfed down earlier. No, it was deeper than that. He worried about Max. The fog of the Subrexon hadn't completely lifted, and his mind-reading mojo was still coming through at low volume. He remembered when Max had first started hearing the voices. They'd come in like NPR anchors at half volume, soft, constant, just under the surface. At least that was how Max had described it. He called the ability an attunement. It's like that part of my brain is cranked up to 11, Max had said. I can hear what people are thinking. I'm going to make a killing at the blackjack tables. Mikey smiled faintly at the memory. His boy always had a thing for cards. It would have pissed Mikey off if Max wasn't so damn good at it. Between the attunement and those sleight of hand tricks he'd perfected back in foster care, Max had earned them enough to get by, sometimes more than that. Like in Murphy, at Harrah's Cherokee Casino tucked in the North Carolina mountains. Just past the state line, one weekend they'd hit it fast and clean. Max played the tables like he could see the future because, in a way, he could. Whispered tells, flickers of thought, the pulse of anxiety radiating off of someone's bluffing too hard. Mikey just stood back and watched the chips stack up. Don't get greedy, he warned. I'm not, Max had said, with that smirk that meant he absolutely was. Still, they walked out with enough to buy the Civic off a guy whose gambling debts had caught up with him. Cash, no questions asked. Mikey didn't love the car, but it ran, mostly. And that win, it had bought them a little time, a little space to breathe. Mikey was always amazed at Max's self-restraint. He liked winning, sure, who didn't? But he never let it get out of hand. Max played to get what they needed and then walked away. which made what happened at Briar Glen even more bullshit. Some guy had accused Max of counting cards loudly, publicly, and followed them out just past the casino doors. Max tried to keep it cool, de-escalate like always, but the guy had to get one last shove, pressing a hand to Max's shoulder, and that was it. Mikey was on him like stink on shit. Didn't matter that Max could have handled it himself. Didn't matter that they were probably already being watched. The second that guy put his hands on Max, Mikey saw red. Max was Mikey's, and Uno reverse, Mikey was his. As Mikey's eyes scanned the road, the Civic's limp headlight caught a roadside sign, gas station 3 miles. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, tugging the seatbelt away from his waist. His bladder was screaming. Should have peed before we left the damn motel. A few minutes later, he spotted the exit and veered off. The Civic let out a mechanical whine as it drifted toward the pull-off, the tires humming over the cracked asphalt. As the car slowed to a stop beneath the flickering gas station canopy, Max stirred beside him. "We there already?" he mumbled, voice thick with sleep. Mikey threw him a half-smile, eyeing the mess of Max's hair. "Not yet," he said, pushing open the driver's side door. "But I gotta piss. Bad." Max watched as Mikey jogged into the gas station. His head throbbed, a deep, splitting ache like someone was driving a hatchet straight through the center of his skull. The lingering effects of the Subrexin were tearing through his system, and he wasn't sure how much longer they'd stick around. Back at the motel, he'd heard whispers, faint and scattered, the edges of other people's thoughts bleeding into his own. Even Mikey's worried mind had brushed against his, flickering in and out like a radio flipping between static and song. Max had grown used to it. Over time, he'd learned to control which thoughts he heard, like tuning a dial. Mikey's mind was usually off limits. There hadn't been a real conversation about it. Max just figured it was the polite thing to do. Besides, he knew what Mikey thought about anyway. Him. Almost all of Mikey's thoughts circled back to Max's safety. His stubborn loyalty was so loud sometimes it didn't even need the attunement to feel it. Max rubbed his temples and let out a slow breath. The windshield was fogged, the outside world a blur of headlights and shadows as a few cars zipped by on the otherwise deserted highway. Feeling boxed in, he cracked the door open and stepped out into the night. The air hit him like a cold slap, sharp, clean, and real. He breathed it in. There hadn't been much time to catch his breath since escaping Briar Glen, and after that drunken asshole back at the motel had spooked them, his energy was all over the place, waxing and waning in sharp, unpredictable bursts. Max leaned against the Civic, his breath shallow. The cool air helped a little, but it wasn't enough. His hands trembled at his sides, and the hatchet pain behind his eyes carved deeper. The world around him blurred at the edges, thoughts crackling in and out like a blown speaker. His powers were short-circuiting, rushing back all at once after being bottled up for too long. He barely registered the sound of Mikey's boots scuffing against the pavement. "Max?" Max blinked slowly, trying to focus. Mikey's voice was sharp with worry. Before he could answer, his knees buckled slightly. Mikey caught him under his arms, steadying him. "Shit, come on, man. You're burning up." Mikey didn't wait. He hauled Max's arms over his shoulder and half-dragged, half-carried him toward the gas station's bathroom around the side of the building. The place smelled like bleach and piss and something worse underneath. A single flickering fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead. The cracked mirror over the sink reflected 2 exhausted kids who had no business being alive, much less running. Mikey guided Max towards the sink, letting him slump against it. He turned on the faucet. Only one tap worked. Cupped his hands under the cold water before splashing it on Max's face. "Stay with me, Maxie, stay with me." Max flinched at the cold but didn't pull away. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Mikey grabbed a wad of rough brown paper towels from the dispenser and wet them under the faucet, pressing them gently to the back of Max's neck. The tremor in Max's hands started to ease. His breathing slowed. For a few minutes they just stood there, Mikey working in slow, methodical movements, cooling him off, grounding him. There was no rush, no barking orders, no fear of being caught, even though they should have been terrified. Mikey's hands lingered longer than necessary, smoothing the wet cloth along the back of Max's neck, his jaw tight with unspoken panic. He wasn't scared of the cops. He wasn't scared of Duran's hunters. He was scared of losing Max. Watching the strongest person he knew unravel in front of him felt like a knife under the ribs, and he couldn't fight it, couldn't punch it away like he would any other threat. Mikey swallowed hard. "You with me?" he asked, voice low, almost breaking. Max nodded weakly. Mikey exhaled, resting his forehead briefly against Max's shoulder. "You all right?" Mikey murmured as much to himself as to Max. "We're all right." Outside, a truck rumbled past, headlights washing over the grimy tile for a second before fading into the distance. In the heavy silence that followed, Mikey stayed right there, still holding on to Max like he was afraid he'd disappear if he let go. Max sagged against the sink, finally starting to relax into Mikey's presence. The warmth of Mikey's hands and the low hum of his voice, it grounded him, stitched him back together. And then a sharp crack split through the fog of his mind. The psychic landscape, quiet and tender a second ago, ruptured. Something heavy, dark, wrong had just pulled up outside. Max jerked upright, nearly slipping on the grimy tile. "Mikey," he rasped, his voice barely a breath. Mikey stiffened, instantly catching him. Max's fingers dug into Mikey's jacket sleeve, his breath coming faster now. "He's here," Max whispered, voice raw. "I can feel them." Mikey's heart lurched in his chest. "Who?" Through the thin walls of the gas station beyond the humming fluorescent and reek of bleach, Max could hear him. A mind that moved like cold steel. Silas Voss. 7. Silas pulled into the gas station, the hum of the government-issue hybrid barely a whisper against the heavy Indiana night. The parking lot stretched out under the sickly buzz of overhead fluorescence, pool of pale yellow light trembling across the cracked asphalt and scattered trash. Beyond the edge of the lot, the cornfields loomed dark, endless, silent. He let the car idle, fingers drumming once against the steering wheel. Billions in black budget funding, and Duran had stuck him with a Prius. Silas snorted under his breath. Maybe that was the point. Look harmless, stay forgettable, until you weren't. He shook off the thought and closed his eyes for a moment, letting his senses unfurl like smoke. The night wasn't quiet for him. It buzzed alive with the leftover scraps of emotions bleeding from inside the station. Max was here. Even drug muted, he'd left a signature, like a smudged fingerprint on glass. But it was Mikey who lit up the place, a bright, frantic pulse. Amateurs. Silas exhaled slowly, the breath misting silently against the chilled air blowing from the dash vents. They were close, cornered, exactly where he wanted them. Inside the bathroom, Max tensed like a wire snapping taut. The fluorescent light above him buzzed and popped, throwing frantic shadows against the grimy tile. His fingers clenched the edge of the sink, knuckles whitening. He felt it, a cold presence sliding into the crack of his mind like oil into water. Max's stomach twisted, his vision blurred for a second, and squeezed his eyes shut, focusing. He could almost hear Silas moving across the lot, the slow, deliberate weight of him pressing against the psychic plane. "Mikey," he whispered, throat raw. "He's here." Mikey spun toward the door, heart lurching in his throat. Through the greasy bathroom window, he caught a glimpse of a silver car pulling into the far end of the lot, plain, unremarkable, terrifying. "Shit," Mikey muttered. His voice was tight, ragged at the edges. "We gotta move, now." Max staggered upright, the world tilting, but he forced himself to stay on his feet. The pressure against his mind increased, searching, prying. He had seconds. He closed his eyes, breathing in the chemical stench of bleach and cheap soap, and slammed his mind shut, imagining walls of concrete and steel bolting into place around his thoughts. For a second, Silas pressed harder, a psychic shove against Max's defenses. Max shoved back hard. The connection snapped like a rubber band. Outside, Silas's eyes narrowed. The trail had gone cold, walled off, muted. "Clever boy," he muttered, his voice scraping the silence. Reaching into the glove box, he grabbed a holstered taser. He had access to deadlier tools, but Durant's orders had been clear. Return the subject, Max, alive. Besides, Silas disliked firearms, crude, loud, and barbaric. He tucked the holster into the waistband of his pants and stepped out of the vehicle, the night air pressing cool against his skin. His gaze swept the lot, slow and methodical. The gas station was the only building for miles, just a lonely island of buzzing fluorescence and cracked pavement. He ambled toward the building, the door chimed, jingling softly as he stepped inside. The place reeked of burnt coffee, old rubber, and fryer grease. A bored-looking cashier sat slouched behind the counter, smacking her gum and scrolling through her phone. Silence could still feel them, traces of Max and Mikey's presence lingering like static in the air. But Max had shut the door on their psychic link, locked him out. Good. Silas liked a chase. Moving casually, he drifted toward the drink cooler, his boots silent against the grimy tile. He grabbed a zero-calorie soda, cracked the seal just to feel the snap of it in his hands. Where are you, boys? He lingered by the snack aisle, selecting a bag of jerky. Protein. Always useful. No rush. He could always afford to take his time. At the counter, he set down his items. Evening, he said, flashing his trademark smile. Sharp, easy, dangerous. Silas was handsome, striking even. Dark hair, an expensive 5 o'clock shadow, and olive skin that caught the yellow overhead light just right. His dark brown eyes were the real weapon, though, soft when he needed them. Disarming. The cashier barely glanced up, her hair pulled back into a lazy clip, her overdrawn red lips smacking rhythmically against her gum. That all for you, Shug? She asked, her accent curling around the word. Silas slid a crisp $20 bill across the counter without blinking. Say, he said, his tone light, conversational. You haven't seen a couple of young guys come through here, have you? The cashier paused, cracking open the plastic bag. Her eyes flicked up to him, guarded. Who's asking? Silas smiled wider, slipping a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, laying it gently onto the 20. He is, he said, glancing meaningfully at Benjamin Franklin's unimpressed face on the bill. The attendant hesitated, tapping her long nails against the counter. She thought about the two boys she'd seen earlier, one stumbling, one half dragging him around the corner of the building. But minimum wage bought minimum effort. I might have, she said slowly, popping her gum. What do they look like? Silas pulled his phone from his inner coat pocket and flipped to a photo of Max taken at Briar Glen. Max was giving a half smile in the picture, eyes dulled by the effects of the drug but still recognizable. The cashier leaned in, squinting. He's cute, she said thoughtfully. Can't say I've seen him around. Silas swiped to the next photo, grainier, a security cam capture of Mikey from earlier that day. Now him, she said, her voice stretching slow. He looks familiar. Her gaze flicked back to the hundreds sitting between them, and when Silas calmly added another crisp bill to the pile, her memory sharpened. You know, she said, voice brightening, he does look familiar. Might have seen him in here just a bit ago. Silas nodded once, slowly folding the receipt into his pockets. Patience paid. It always did. Mikey peeked out through the dingy bathroom window. Looks like the coast is clear, he mumbled. Max caught a glimpse of himself in the cracked, dirty mirror. How had he ended up here, hiding out in some disgusting gas station bathroom, running for his life? He thought about the plans that they used to make, move to L.A., start over. Max would work as a street magician, pulling quarters from thin air and amazing tourists on the boardwalk. Mikey had joked about going to business school, maybe getting serious about something for once. None of it had mattered, really, as long as they were together. That had been the whole point. And now they were fugitives. Running from someone for reasons Max didn't fully understand. You coming? Mikey said, snapping him out of it. Max blinked hard, shaking off the swirl of regret clawing at his gut. Yeah, he said, pushing off the sink. Yeah, I'm coming. Pulling open the bathroom door quietly, Mikey's eyes swept the backside of the gas station. They were only feet from the Civic. If they could make it across the parking lot without being seen, they could make a beeline straight for Chicago. Max hovered behind him, tense, ready to move. Mikey edged around the corner of the building, boots scraping lightly against the pavement. He waved Max forward, pointing him toward the gas station. I think he's inside, Mikey mouthed. Make a run for the car. No second guessing, no time. They sprinted. Silas, talking to the cashier, and then Silas's head turned. His dark eyes locked onto them across the parking lot. Shit, Mikey hissed under his breath. His fingers finally closed around the key. He jammed one into the lock, yanked the door open, and threw himself behind the wheel. Max scrambled in after him. The Civic sputtered as Mikey jammed the keys into the ignition and twisted hard. The car groaned, the engine coughing once, then roared reluctantly to life. Mikey floored the accelerator. The rust-bitten car lurched forward with a guttural growl, and the rear-view mirror had a glimpse. Silas shoving the door open, stepping out into the night, his coat flaring behind him. Too late. The Civic peeled out, tires screaming against the pavement as they tore into the dark, leaving the gas station and Silas shrinking behind them. But Mikey knew better than to think they'd lost him. Silas watched as they pulled away, half irritated with himself, half impressed. It had been a while since he had come up against a challenge. Besides, he knew where they were headed. Union Station, Track 12, 9:30 p.m. He could feel it even without the paper trail. The emotions Max and Mikey left behind clung to the gas station like smoke. Panic, desperation, and beneath it all, hope. Hope was predictable. Hope made people stupid. Silas leaned back against the side of his car, the cool metal seeping through his jacket, and watched the taillights fade into the distance. The night settled again around him, heavy and endless. "Run all you want," he murmured. "The track always leads back to me." He closed his eyes and listened to the quiet pulse of the road, the faint psychic residue trailing after them like a scent on the wind. He wasn't worried. The hunt had only just begun. 8. "We're just going to abandon her?" Mikey said as he and Max walked toward the train station. The city buzzed around them, folding into the chaos of Union Station. Max scoffed. "It's not like we can take it with us." Sighing, Max took one last glance at the old Civic. Sure, the car was practically ready for the junkyard, but it was the first car he and Max had ever owned. It felt undignified to leave her here. Still, it was the smart move. Especially now that they were officially being hunted. While the car wasn't registered to them, Durant's bounty hunters had seen them in it. Keeping it would be painting a target on their backs. Mikey let out a low breath, dragging his hands through his hair, and turned toward the station. The second they stepped through the heavy glass doors of Union Station, the world seemed to swell around them. The first thing that Max noticed was the size. The ceiling soared impossibly high, disappearing into patchworks of steel beams and grimy skylights. Everything echoed, the scrape of shoes against marble, the distant rumble of arriving trains, the hollow murmur of announcements over a crackling loudspeaker. This place was huge. Too huge. Columns rose like stone trees, fat and weathered, their surfaces chipped from the years of use. Massive arched windows lined the far walls, letting in shafts of late afternoon light that caught the dust in the air, turning it gold. Travelers swarmed everywhere, families wrangling strollers and suitcases, business people pacing with phones glued to their ears, a couple arguing quietly by a vending machine. The air smelled like coffee, diesel fuel, sweat, and old concrete, thick and heavy, clinging to their clothes. Mikey gave a low whistle. "Big," he muttered, shifting the duffel bag higher on his shoulder. Max nodded mutely, his heart thudding hard in his chest. They didn't belong here, and he could feel it. Everyone moved with purpose. Trains to catch, meetings to make, lives to live. All they had was an alias and a meeting time. Their footsteps echoed as they pushed deeper into the station, keeping close to the edge of the crowd. Every sound seemed sharper. Every stranger's glance felt longer than it should. Max tugged his hoodie lower over his eyes. He couldn't shake the feeling that even in a crowd this big, they somehow still stood out. Somewhere across the concourse, an announcement crackled to life. "Track 12, northbound service to Chicago, departing at 9:30 p.m." Mikey tapped Max's arms, nodding toward the far end of the station where the escalators led down to the tracks. "That's us." They moved carefully, threading through the chaos, two shadows trying not to be noticed in a place built to swallow people whole. Soon they were down the escalator and through the throngs of people. "What was her name again?" Max asked. Dodging a group of school children, Mikey searched his pockets, realizing the receipt that had the details on it was missing. He shot Max a look. "What?" he replied, tilting his head. "I wrote down the details, the person we were supposed to meet, but it's missing. I must have left it back in the motel," Mikey said, cursing himself. "That must be how the bounty hunter found us. That must be why he didn't chase us." Max's heart fell into his ass. "You know where we were going, though, right?" "Yes, I remember the train, but the details were in one of those messaging apps that deletes itself after you open it up," Mikey said. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the details. 9:30, Union Station, Track 12, 2 tickets, Chicago, meet at East Platform. Mikey recited it out loud to Max, who gave him an unsure shrug. "Sounds right to me." "They didn't say who we were meeting?" Mikey shook his head. Max spotted the self-service kiosk tucked along the far wall, metallic, humming faintly under the flickering lights. Mikey tugged his hoodie lower and nodded toward them. "Fast, quiet," he muttered. They threaded through the milling crowd, ducking behind clusters of travelers until they reached the machines. Mikey punched in their confirmation code, his fingers jittery, heart hammering in his ears. The kiosk spit out 2 paper tickets with a mechanical whir. Mikey snatched them up and shoved them into his pockets. "Let's move," he said, "before tall, dark, and Psycho catches up." They made their way through the cavernous platform, Mikey leading the way. He glanced back at Max, who had pulled the duffel bag tighter against his side. They worked hard not to get separated in the crowd. Track 12 is just down that way, Mikey said, nodding toward a distant sign. They pushed through the throngs of travelers, eyes scanning the space for anyone familiar or worse, anyone watching. They said someone would be here to receive us, Mikey murmured to Max. Take us the rest of the way. Max didn't respond. He was staring dead ahead, frozen mid-step, his face pale and tight. Mikey followed his gaze, and that's when he saw it too. They locked eyes with someone across the station. Someone they definitely recognized, but hadn't seen in ages. 9. Syl Clearwater? Mikey said, weaving his way toward the aging social worker. An elegant long braid of gray hair rested over her shoulder as she sat patiently on a bench beneath the platform sign. The boys hurried toward her. Her weathered face broke into a wide, familiar grin when she spotted them. She opened her arms wide, and both Mikey and Max slipped into her warm embrace. Syl, what are you doing here? Mikey asked, breathing in the familiar earthy scent of patchouli that clung to her clothes. I've come to take you the rest of the way, she said. You've done good, Mikey. She pulled back from the hug and cupped their faces in her hand, her smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. Her gaze landed warmly on Max. And how are you holding up, young man? I hear it's been quite the journey for you two. Max offered a small, weary smile. I'm doing okay. Thanks to him, he said, eyes flickering towards Mikey. Syl gave a hearty laugh. Yes, I've heard you two are quite close. Mikey and Max exchanged a look. You could say that, Mikey said with a small laugh. They chatted for a few brief moments, going over the details of the journey and the instructions they had received. But then Syl's face turned serious. This means Durant knows you're headed for the Resistance, she said, her voice low and grave. There's no time to waste. If he sent one of his hunters after you, and if we're discovered before we're ready to strike back. She shook her head, worry creasing her brow. It could cost us everything. Mikey's eyes scanned the crowd and froze. There, moving like a shark through the sea of people, was a familiar face. Olive complexion, dark eyes. Silas Foss. He's here, Mikey whispered urgently. Syl's face hardened when she spotted him. Silas, she muttered, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. This is not good. We need to go, now. She ushered the boys towards the train. Max hesitated. We should split up, Max said. It's me he wants. I can draw him off. Meet up with you later. Mikey's head snapped around. Like hell you will. I'm not losing you again. Silas's lips pressed into a tight line. It would be harder for him to track us if we broke up, she admitted. Max shrugged, flashing that trademark devil-may-care grin. The Subrexon's worn off. I can hold him off long enough. Please, Max, don't, Mikey said, his voice breaking around the edges. Syl looked between the two of them, weighing the seconds they didn't have. At last she nodded and pulled Max in close. She whispered something in his ear, too soft for Mikey to hear. Max's cocky smile faltered, determination settled over him like armor. Whatever she said changed everything. Max turned back to Mikey and stepping close. Without warning, he grabbed Mikey's face and kissed him, hard, desperate, real. Mikey clutched at the front of Max's hoodie, grounding himself, refusing to let go, even as the world spun around them. When they finally broke apart, Max's forehead rested against Mikey's for a breathless second. I'll find you, I promise, Max whispered. And then he slipped into the crowd, gone. Syl's hand closed around Mikey's arm, pulled him onto the train just as the final boarding call echoed through the station. Behind them, the hunter was coming. Silas watched from the edge of the platform, boots planted, arms folded across his chest. The crowd surged toward the departing train, parents corralling kids, travelers dragging worn suitcases behind them. He barely paid them any mind. His focus narrowed to two figures in particular. Syl Clearwater leading one boy onto the train, and the other one he cared about, moving away, Max. Silas's lips quirked upward. Smart move. Split the herd. Confuse the predator. He pushed away from the column he'd been leaning against and followed Max's retreating figure, weaving through the cluster of travelers without rushing. No need to hurry. He had all the time in the world. Max disappeared down a side stairwell into the underbelly of the station, into the dim tunnels beneath the Union Station, where freight deliveries and service corridors sprawled like veins under the city. Silas moved down the dark stairwell, the hum of the station fading behind him. Down here, the tunnel smelled like diesel concrete and rot. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering weakly as he stalked forward, boots echoing on the wet concrete floor. He spotted Max at the far end, shoulders square, chest heavy. The boy wasn't running. He was waiting. "You think you can take me?" Silas called down the tunnel, voice low and amused. Max said nothing. Instead, the air around him shifted, subtle at first, like the wrong note in a familiar song. Silas barely had time to brace before Max struck. The psychic attack hit him like a wrecking ball. Not a precise strike, a blast of raw terror, rage, and grief. A hurricane feeling tearing through Silas's defenses. His vision fractured for a heartbeat. Images flashed. A boy bound to a chair, a man in uniform, a scream, blood on white tile. Silas stumbled, catching himself against the wall, teeth gritted hard enough to crack. Shit, he's stronger than I thought. Max pressed the attack, stumbling towards him, his fingers twitching, his face twisted in pain and fury. The tunnel seemed to bend under the psychic pressure, lights bursting in showers of sparks overhead. Silas slammed his echo mine outward, trying to anchor himself, but Max hit him again. Not with skill, not with training, just brute force. A mind burning itself alive to take him down. For a second, a real second, Silas wondered if the boy could actually do it, could actually break him. He pushed harder. The air went razor-thin, vibrating with the force of it. Silas's own echo mind reached into the chaos, tore through the emotions, and found the weak point. Fear of losing Mikey. Fear of becoming a monster. Fear of never being free. Silas turned it all inward. Max let out a strangled cry, dropping to one knee, clutching his skull like he could tear the attack out of his mind. Silas staggering forward, blood pounding in his ears, breathing hard. "You had spirit," he said, almost quietly. "But spirit doesn't win wars." Max tried to rise, tried to pull the power back into himself for one last blow. Silas caught him mid-swing, grabbing his wrist, twisting it behind his back with brutal efficiency. The cuffs snapped around Max's wrist before he even hit the ground. Still, Max fought, thrashing, trying to kick out, but it was sloppy now, desperate. Silas pressed the injector into his neck. Max's body jerked once, then sagged. The sedation took hold fast, dragging him under. Silas knelt there for a moment, breathing hard, feeling the boy's pulse slow against his palm. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but Max Devereux could have been dangerous, could have been something terrifying if given enough time. He hoisted Max over his shoulder, grimacing at the dead weight. "Too soon, kid," he muttered. "You could have been great." Without another word, Silas turned, carrying Max back up the tunnel toward the cold, waiting night. 10. The train rumbled steadily beneath them, a low and ceaseless hum. Mikey slouched between two seats near the end of the car, his hands trembling in his lap. His chest felt heavy. Helping Max escape from Briar Glen had all been for nothing. What was the point of all the planning, sleepless nights, the risks? What was the point of stealing security badges, picking fights, bleeding out over every goddamn mile of road between Georgia and Chicago, if Max was just going to throw himself back into the fire? Mikey gritted his teeth, a sour taste rising in the back of his throat. Why had Max even bothered letting him in, letting him fight for him? If he was going to shove Mikey onto the train with Syl like it didn't matter, like Mikey's whole existence, his whole purpose was to be protected from the fallout while Max went down swinging alone. It was reckless. It was selfish. It was stupidly Max. Mikey pressed the heel of his palm into his eyes, willing the sting there to go away. He was so angry he could hardly breathe, but underneath the anger, deeper, sharper, was fear. Fear that Max had made a choice he couldn't undo. Fear that by the time Mikey found him again, if he ever did, Max would already be gone. It made no sense. Frustration flared in Mikey's chest. He turned toward the window, watching as Chicago's city lights glittered behind him, then like a shattered mirror, growing smaller with every passing second. He didn't know what had happened to Max. Didn't know if he had gotten away, didn't know if he was safe. Syl Clearwater sat across from him, her warm gaze steady, her long braid draped over one shoulder as she idly flipped a jade ring around her finger. She radiated a strange calm, worried, yes, but tired, too, like someone who had fought too many battles already. "I know this seems like it's all for nothing," she said, breaking the thick silence between them. Mikey's eyes snapped toward hers. "What did you say to him?" he demanded, voice rough, too loud in the quiet car. "Before you told him something. What was it?" Syl tilted her head, regarding him for a long moment. Her expression softened. "I told him the truth," she said quietly, "that the trial of the anchors is coming, and if we want to stop the devastation that's ahead, we'll need him." Mikey stared at her like she was speaking another language. "Max, she continued. I don't understand, he whispered. Syl smiled sadly, the kind of smile worn by people who knew too much and couldn't say enough. You will, she said. In time, we all have our part to play. The lights above them flickered as the train picked up speed, the steel tracks singing beneath them, carrying them farther and farther from the only person Mikey cared about. He leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes, swallowing hard against the knot in his throat. He didn't know where Max was, didn't know if he was hurt, didn't know if he was captured. But he knew one thing. Tilting his head back, he whispered Max's name under his breath. Not a question, not a prayer. A promise. I'll find you. The train pushed westward into the dark, toward the vast stretch of Colorado beyond the horizon, while Chicago faded into the distance behind them like a dream left unfinished. Mikey had slept most of the way, and now he waited patiently until the train screeched into the Denver Union Station. The sun was beginning to set, bleeding gold and crimson across the glass and steel skyline. Mikey pressed his forehead against the window, watching the city blur past. His hands felt too small, too useless in his lap. Across from him, Syl Clearwater gathered her things without speaking, her long braid swinging over her shoulder. They slipped off the train and into the station where a crispness clung to the evening air, sharp and unfamiliar. Waiting for them at the curb was a black SUV. 2 men and a woman leaned against it, casual but alert. Dressed in loose-fitting military gear, Mikey knew better than to mistake their slouch for laziness. Resistance. Come on, Syl murmured. The drive out of Denver was long and silent. City lights gave way to darkness and mountains rose up like sleeping giants against the horizon. They passed through Boulder without stopping, heading deeper into the hills toward Nederland. When they finally pulled up outside of the cluster of old cabins, Mikey could barely make out the structures through the thick wall of trees. It was remote, hidden, perfect. Syl stepped out first, motioning Mikey to follow. His sneakers crunched on the gravel as they approached a lodge at the center of the compound. The door swung open after a coded knock. Standing there, framed by warm, flickering lights, was a woman Mikey didn't recognize. She was small and sharp-eyed, with short black hair and stillness that seemed to pull the world tighter around her. She looked ordinary at first until you realized just how carefully she wasn't revealing herself. Syl smiled, a rare, genuine smile. Mikey, she said, turning toward him, this is Izumi Kato. Mikey blinked, confused. The name rang a bell. Kato. He'd heard Max mention it once a long time ago, a sister, a death. He took a step back, his stomach flipping. I thought she was dead, Syl supplied gently. So does the world. Mikey stared. Izumi didn't flinch under his gaze. She was the first EMP to do what no one thought possible, Syl continued, her voice low. She cured herself. Mikey frowned. Cured? Syl nodded. She stripped away her attunement, removed it completely. She's proof that it can be done. Mikey's heart thudded against his ribs. You're telling me that's what the Resistance wants? He said, voice rough. Not just to fight Durant, not just to protect EMPs, you want to get rid of attunements? Syl's expression softened with pity. We want to end the cycle, she said. Durant weaponizes people like Max. The Resistance hides them, but either way they're prisoners of what's inside of them. Always hunted, always feared, always hurting. Mikey looked at Izumi again, really looked and saw it. The absence, the quiet. There was no hum of power around her, no static charge in the air, just stillness. Freedom. Izumi finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. You and Max deserve a life that's yours, she said. Not one Durant built, not one anyone else controls. Mikey didn't know what to say. Didn't know if he trusted them. Didn't know if Max would even live long enough to see that future. The door swung wider behind Izumi, revealing a glimpse of the lodge's interior. Maps, blueprints, people moving with quiet, urgent purpose. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. And Mikey, like it or not, was standing at the edge of it. He turned his head slightly, looking back at the dark hills beyond the lodge. Somewhere out there, Max was either running or bleeding or captured. The night swallowed his words whole, and the Resistance closed in around him. Thank you so much for checking out this audiobook narration by me, Lewis Roberts, the author. The events of this story take place between atop the bell tower and within the Winter Garden. And also, we love this twist at the end, this little reveal, which opens up for the third installment and final installment of the Spire trilogy entitled Amid the Twilight Campus, which is the sort of epic conclusion to the Spire trilogy. I hope you've enjoyed this little experiment, this interesting and exciting way to share this companion novelette with you. And if you want more of the Spire trilogy, be sure to check out Atop the Bell Tower and Within the Winter Garden, currently available on Kindle Unlimited and paperback on Amazon. And stay tuned for the third and final installment of the Spire trilogy, Amid the Twilight Campus, out July 1st.